Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Ixalan spoilers. So we're reaching the very end of spoiler season. In fact, tomorrow the full set comes out, so we'll get everything just kind of dumped on us at once. But we have a few rares and our last mythic to talk about today, so let's jump right into it with Axis of Mortality. 6 mana white enchantment, and at the beginning of your upkeep, it lets you exchange the life total of 2 players. So in a 2-player game, you can obviously switch with your opponent. So maybe they're at 20, you're down to 5. You can just switch the life totals. It's way more interesting in Commander, where you have 4 players and can do some sweet shenanigans. So first off, with Axis of Mortality, I don't think there's any consideration of playing this card in Standard. We don't have any support cards that I've seen. There's no payoff for switching life totals or anything like that. So I think this is just stone unplayable. If you want to gain life in a control deck, there's just way better options. So we're focused on Commander here. But in Commander, you can do some really sweet things with Axis of Mortality. So Axis of Mortality most closely compares to Soul Conduit, I think, which is repeatable life total exchanging card. The difference is, Soul Conduit, you gotta pay 6 mana, and then you gotta pay 6 each time you want to do it. Axis of Mortality lets you do the switching for free every turn once you get it down. Also a little bit like Mirror Universe or Magus of the Mirror, but those are one-shot effects. So I think that if you're looking to switch life totals, Axis of Mortality suddenly becomes the best option in Commander. So what do you do with the ability to switch life totals? And here's an important fact that sometimes people miss. So according to the rules of Magic, let's say you are at 20 life and your opponent's at 5 life. Not that you'd want to do this, but you switch life totals, that counts as you losing life. Your life total went from 20 to 5, so you actually lost 15 life. On the other hand, if it's reversed and you went from 5 to 20, that actually counts as gaining life. So this is a life gain, life loss card, even though it doesn't say that, which means Sanguine Bond, whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So if you can go from, let's say, 20 life to 40 life in Commander, you get to shoot an opponent for 20 damage along the way. With Tainted Remedy, if your opponent would gain life, they lose that much life instead. So maybe you are at a high life total, and your opponent's at a low life total. Let's go with 40-20 again. You go to switch life totals, your opponent's actually gaining 20 life, but they can't gain life because of Tainted Remedy, so it actually just kills them. Exquisite Blood, more tricks there. If the opponent would lose life, you gain that much life. So if your opponent goes from, let's say, 40 down to 20 because you exchange life totals, you're going to gain that 20 life. A little bit convoluted, but there's some really cool life gain enchantment shenanigans you can do just by switching life totals, because it's going to be huge chunks of life gain and life loss as you're bouncing life totals around with Axis of Mortality. So that's one thing I'm super excited about. The other sweet thing you can do with Axis of Mortality is just play it in a straight up life gain deck. So if you can maybe drain your own life total down, or even just keep switching with different players so you're gaining life with Axis of Mortality, you can get some really crazy triggers like Ageless Entity, 5 mana 4/4, but whenever you gain life, you get that many +1/+1 counters on it. So if you gain 20 life, all of a sudden it's a 5 mana 24/24. Or Cradle Vitality lets you do that with any of your creatures. When you gain life, you pay 1 and a white, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature for each 1 life you gain. Maybe you have a hexproof creature, an unblockable creature, you gain a huge chunk of life with Axis, put a bunch of counters on them. Well of Lost Dreams lets you pay X and draw X, where X is the amount of life you gain, which lets you draw a ton of cards. You switch on your upkeep, you have the Well of Lost Dreams out, you could spend your entire turn just dumping all your mana into card draws. So I don't think the Axis of Mortality is close to playable in Standard or in Modern, anything like that, but I think it's going to be an awesomely fun build around for shenanigy combo-y decks with Sanguine Bonds and so forth, and also just straight up life gain decks where you can do some really cool tricks in Commanders. So A+ Commander card, because I love these janky build arounds, but not something to even consider at this point. You never know. I mean, if we get a Sanguine Bond or some sort of combo piece like that reprinted in Standard, then there might be a conversation to be had, but right now we just don't have those pieces. So sweet for Commander, but not much else at this point. Moving on to the rares, we got Death Gorge Scavenger, which is a pretty interesting graveyard hate card. Life life gain card, a kind of a big threat. 3 mana, you get a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can exile a card from a graveyard. If it's a creature, you gain 2 life. If it's a non-creature, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So I really wish it got a counter. That would make this card super good. But even in its current form, it's kind of like this weird hybrid of Scavenging Ooze and Kitchen Fink. So enters the battlefield, you can exile a creature, you gain 2 life. That's exactly like Kitchen Fink stats, except instead of having persist, you have the ability to keep exiling the graveyard when you attack with it. But we've seen 3 mana, 3/2s be playable when they gain you 2 life when they enter the battlefield. And then it's kind of like this weird, slow Scavenging Ooze. So you don't have the ability to just exile a whole bunch of stuff like you can with Scavenging Ooze if you have the mana, but it does do it for free, which is a nice upside. So you can pick apart your opponent's graveyard little by little, turn by turn, which means in Standard, there's actually a lot of things that make this card reasonable. God-Pharaoh's Gift is a pretty big card, pretty big deck at the moment. So the ability to just play your 3-drop, eat your opponent's best creature in their graveyard so they can't reanimate it with God-Pharaoh's Gift and gain a couple of life, that's pretty strong. And then if you get to attack, you can keep doing that and exiling more things. We also have Embalm, which could get better at rotation with the format getting smaller, Angel of Sanctions and Friends. We already see some of the Aftermath cards seeing play, like Cut to Ribbons, which again, with the format getting smaller, these things might be around a bit more. So having a on-curve, already playable card that just incidentally hates on the graveyard and maybe even gains you a bit of life is actually pretty powerful. So I'm actually pretty excited for the possibilities of Death Gorge Scavenger in Standard. The other thing to consider in Modern is I don't think you would really want this over Scavenging Ooze, but there is some nice upside with Collected Company. So if you only have 4 mana and you're Collected Companying and you really need to get rid of something in the graveyard, Scavenging Ooze actually doesn't help you because you don't have the mana to activate. But you can Collected Company, hit your Death Gorge Scavenger, and immediately get rid of the Stinkweed, no mana required. So I think that for the most part, people will stick to Scavenging Ooze because it's cheaper, a little bit more controllable, but it's worth mentioning the sweet synergy with Collected Company in Modern. So A+ for Standard. I really like this card. I think it's going to be pretty good. It's a little bit format dependent. It's fine just for value. I mean, in a Dinosaur deck is a good mid-range threat. But if graveyard decks are playing some important threats to exile, it gets way, way better. So I'm glad this card is around. Next on our list, we have Shadowed Caravelle, which is one of the new vehicles from Ixalan. And oh man, I'm not super excited about this one. It's a 2-mana 2/2. It crews for 2, so it's got some nice symmetry with the 2/2/2. And whenever you explore, you can put a +1/+1 counter on it. So this could be an okay limited card, like moderately okay if you have a lot of exploring. It does get the counters. It gets bigger and bigger with your Deadeye Trackers and your Merfolk Branch Walkers. So if you're building like an Explore Matters deck in limited, I could see Shadowed Caravelle being a reasonable card in your deck. But if you consider Constructed, I mean, look at the vehicles we have at 2 mana. In Kaladesh block, we had Smuggler's Copter, now banned. Heart of Kirin, at some points the best card in Standard. Even Sky Skiff, the lowly common, has more toughness. It crews for less, it has flying. So the interesting part about Shadowed Caravelle is it really shows Wizards trying to find the balance for vehicles. They push them very hard in Kaladesh block, probably too hard. I mean, when cards are getting banned with your vehicle card type, you probably went a bit too far. So now they're kind of reeling it back in, maybe too far here in Ixalan, because Shadowed Caravelle is a laughable rare compared to Smuggler's Copter. It's kind of laughable compared to Sky Skiff. I think Sky Skiff is just a straight up better card. So I think that as vehicles keep showing up in Standard, keep showing up in new sets, we'll probably end up somewhere in the middle. I don't think the vehicles will be as bad as the Ixalan vehicles, but I also don't think they'll be as good as the Kaladesh video. So we're kind of seeing this balancing act of how powerful vehicles should be, and Shadowed Caravelle is just a good example of this super low end power level because it looks pretty bad compared to what we saw in Kaladesh. Next up, we have Fleet Swallower, a new massive fish, 7 mana, you get a 6/6, and when it attacks, you get to mill half of target player's library, rounded up. So this card is utterly unplayable, except with one semi-exception, probably for against odds or budget magic. So it's basically a Traumatize on a stick. The sweet part is it's an insta-kill with Fraying Sanity. So if you have a Fraying Sanity out and can attack a single time with Fleet Swallower, you mill half of your opponent's deck, Fraying Sanity mills the other half of your opponent's deck, game is over. You could do this potentially with God Pharaoh's Gift or Liliana for reanimation to get Fleet Swallower out a little bit quicker. So I don't think that this is actually playable. Maybe casually, maybe in against odds or something. I don't expect it to be a tier strategy. 7 mana and needing to attack is just a lot, but it is a really cool combo. So I'm glad they made this card because it's so exciting and fun with Fraying Sanity, even if it doesn't end up being a tier card or a tier deck. We also got Double Volley, a new 3-mana burn spell, 3 mana, 3 damage to target creature or player. Then, if you attack with a creature and trigger raid, you can pay 5 and return it from your graveyard to your hand. So this is basically an updated version of Hammer of Bogarden. There's not really a huge difference. I guess the biggest difference is the timing and the need to raid, but it is basically a Hammer of Bogarden. It's nice that it gives you some repeatable damage. Like if you're a mono red deck playing a control deck, this gives you a way you can kind of grind out card advantage. The biggest question I have for Double Volley though is we already see the red decks in Standard having this go long plan with Ramanamp Ruins, with Sunscorched Desert. So do you really want to play a subpar, I mean 3 mana sorcery, 3 damage is not that powerful, a subpar burn spell to give you this late game effect when you have the late game effect already in your mana base basically for free? It's so easy to play Ramanamp Ruins and Sunscorched Desert in your deck. The cost is super low, so we'll have to see. I think it could show up as a sideboard card for Ramanamp Red against control or slower decks like that where it's hard to deal with. Also worth noting, we do have a lot of graveyard hate. We were just talking about some of it, so it's not as guaranteed in your other formats where it's just going to grind your opponent out of the game. There's a reasonable chance they just randomly have some incidental graveyard hate. So I think Double Volley's best shot of being playable will be as kind of a control hoser from a Ramanamp Red deck out of the sideboard. Otherwise, the rate just isn't that good. When you consider it's 5 to get back from your hand, you're paying 8 mana total for 3 damage, and while it's nice that it's card advantage for your red deck, you kind of already got that with the Desert Land, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. We also got Field of Ruin moving to the world of uncommons, and this card's actually super exciting. It's kind of like an updated version of Ghost Quarter, so it adds a colorless mana, you can pay 2, sack it, you get to destroy a non-basic land your opponent controls, and each player gets to search for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield, and it comes in untapped, it's worth noting. So this in Standard is basically a update on Ghost Quarter, an update on Tech Edge. It's basically land destruction, and it's land destruction that we haven't had in the format for a long time, but it's also very necessary because with the flip enchantments and the flip artifacts, we have some potentially busted lands in Standard. I mean, we got Gaia's Cradle and Itlamok. We have a land that taps for 3 mana in Lost Vale. We have Conqueror's Foothold, which is like Obelisk of Alara landform or something. So we have some super powerful lands, which means Field of Ruin is just a nice way to kind of a safety valve in the format. If there's a broken deck with Itlamok or Lost Vale or any of these crazy flip lands, Field of Ruin can come in, give you a way to efficiently deal with it. It's not good enough that you're just going to play it to destroy your opponent's Drowned Catacombs or whatever random dual land they have. It's not good in that sense, although it is nice that you get a land too, so it's not really card disadvantage, but it's going to be hard to really color screw your opponent with Field of Ruin because there's usually enough basics floating around in Standard, but it is nice to make sure that we don't get just crushed by one of these powerful non-basic flip lands. It's worth noting as well that you can do some shenanigans in Standard with Aven Mind Sensor, which makes it so your opponent can only search the top 4 cards of their library instead of their whole library. So if your opponent doesn't have a basic in their top 4 cards, and when you consider subdecks might only have 3, 4, 5 basics, there's a reasonable chance that happens. Then Field of Ruin is just a strip mine that also doesn't cost you a land because Aven Mind Sensor doesn't impact you, so you can search out another land and just strip mine your opponent. So there's a chance, I mean, maybe we see Aven Mind Sensor, Ramanamp Excavator, Field of Ruin, land destruction, strip mine action in Standard. It also gives modern decks some redundancy. Ghost Quarter sees heavy heavy play in Modern. Field of Ruin is not as good as Ghost Quarter. It only hits non-basics, and the ability to search up your own basic isn't as good as just being free and hitting any land. However, it does give redundancy to the Leonin Arbiter decks. We've even seen Mindlock Orb. It's fringe, but it does show up from time to time. So there's ways you can turn Field of Ruin into an expensive strip mine. Might be better than Tech Edge, which is super slow, because if you're Ghost Quartering your opponent and trying to use that as a strip mine, your opponent's unlikely to get the 4 lands necessary to activate Tectonic Edge, at least in the early game. But Field of Ruin doesn't care about that, so we might see it show up as Ghost Quarters 5 through 8 in like Death and Taxes type decks in Modern. But overall, it is a great addition to Standard as a safety valve for the flip lands, and it could show up in Modern in some number. Finally today we have 3 uncommons. Emissary of Sunrise. I mean, it's fine. It's a nice creature for limited. Enters the battlefield and explores, so it's either a 3/2 first strike for 3, or it kind of draws you a card, but not really exciting, not in any of the important creature types for Standard, not a vampire or anything like that. Rigging Runner gives pirates a 1-drop, and it's an interesting effect. So it's a 1/1 first strike, but if you have Raid, you get to make it a 2/2 with first strike. As a 2/2 with first strike, it's great. The problem is, you want to play your 1-drops on turn 1 most of the time, and if you're playing Rigging Runner on turn 1, gonna be hard to trigger Raid. I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's better than Siren Stormcaller, for example, as a 1-drop for the pirate deck. I don't think it's as good as some of the Ramanamp Red 1-drops that are rotating, like Falconwrath Gorger. So we'll have to see. It's not a bad 1-drop, and if you can raid it, it's actually a very powerful 1-drop. It's just awkward to try to raid your 1-drop, because then you're not casting it on turn 1, and as a 2/2 first strike for 1 on turn 2 or turn 3, it's a little bit less impressive. Finally, we got Perilous Voyage, which is a pretty interesting disperse type spell. So the downside of Perilous Voyage, can't hit your stuff. It only hits your opponent's stuff, so you can't do any like Snapcaster, bounce my Snapcaster shenanigans, or Torrential Gearhulk, bounce my Torrential Gearhulk, anything like that. However, you can scry 2 if you bounce something small. So we'll have to see how this shakes out. The downside is Disperse hasn't proven to be particularly playable in recent years, the 2-mana bounce spells, but it could show up as like a 1-of in a control deck, something like that if people really want the effect. But it's a reasonable potential upgrade thanks to the scry ability compared to Disperse. And that's our daily Ixalan spoilers for today. So what janky combos can you think of for Axis of Mortality, switching life totals? How good is Deathgorger Scavenger? Is it the kitchen fink / scavenging ooze of Standard? Could it ever show up in Modern? Are you disappointed by the Ixalan vehicles, or is this a necessary adjustment, powering down the shadowed Caravelles and such because of how good vehicles were in Kaladesh? What about Fleet Swallower? Are you going to combo some people off with Frang Sanity? Is Double Volley good enough to show up in Standard? Field of Ruin, Ghost Quarter Locking, can we do it? How about the commons and uncommons? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.